your name and where you're calling from into the chat box at the bottom. That way we won't have time for everyone to introduce themselves, but that way verbally, but that way we'll still get to know who everyone is who's on the call with us. As this slide says, today is the first session in our MEL series, which is part of the Unlearning Labs that we piloted last fall. And you'll hear more about that from Gunjan in just a minute. Today's session is on MEL, monitoring, evaluation, and learning, the basics. It's on the 101. And our colleagues Pablo and Francis from the Hunger Project will lead that, and we will hand this over to them in just a minute. Next slide, please. Very quickly, a few ground rules. These are going to be familiar to many of you. The most important one is just to be active, to participate, to give your thoughts, your questions. This is a space that is designed for all of us, and it is only as productive as we make it. We will have polls and breakout rooms and different opportunities for you to interact and to for us all to give our thoughts. So please take advantage of those. There's also, again, for the chat box, you can put any questions that you have throughout the call in the chat box. We will monitor that and make sure they are responded to. If you aren't speaking, please make sure to mute yourself so that we can all hear. And in general, just remember to be respectful of all of our time here and everyone that's here. A quick intro to the movement. Again, many of you know the Movement for Community-Led Development was launched in 2015 on the very same day that the Sustainable Development Goals were announced, were launched by the UN. And the whole idea behind it is that you can't achieve these really important goals without having communities at the center and communities leading in that process. And now, a few years in, well, 8 years in, I guess, there is well over 1,500 civil society organizations from all over the world that are part of it, as well as, I think, over 80, if not 85, international NGOs that are also part of this. The heart and soul of the movement is the national associations, used to be called national chapters, and they work in two main ways. The first one is around advocacy partnerships with national governments and national actors supporting decentralization and devolution agendas in all the different countries that they work in. The other way is facilitating partnerships with communities and helping communities to become healthy, productive, resilient, self-reliant, or supporting them in doing that. And through these two different ways, affecting systems change, and we believe that that will collectively help us all achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And with that, Gunjan, over to you on this series.
Thank you so much, Nelly. And again, let me add my words of welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us. I know we have people from different time zones here, so we appreciate the time you have taken to be with us today on this learning journey together. Very quickly, before we begin, we wanted to remind ourselves of why we are all here today and what are these unlearning labs that we've started. So as you know, the unlearning, or some of you may know, the unlearning labs started last year. And this was really designed in response to the traditional, very top-down, very colonial forms of learning and capacity building, capacity strengthening, capacity development that have characterized our sector. And so the idea of the unlearning labs was to really rethink the way we think about learning, about knowledge, about capacities, and about what is it that we can all do together. So they are built on this idea of mutual capacity strengthening. The unlearning labs are built on the idea that no one is really an expert, but that all of us together can pool in our experience to create a lot of expertise that we can all learn from and with each other. And that it doesn't matter what labels we carry or what degrees we have or what languages we speak, we all have capacities to do the work that we do. That's how we do this work, right? So the Unlearning Labs are really designed as a space for all of us to pool together our experiences, our expertise, our knowledge, our learning to make something bigger and for all of us to go together. The first Unlearning Labs series was last year. It was on strategic planning. Some of you were a part of it. We had 2 colleagues from Malawi and Uganda leading that series. And there we looked at something like strategic planning, which all organizations do. We may or may not call it strategic planning, but if we are running an organization, we do it. And we had really looked at, well, what does it mean to do strategic planning from a community-led lens? What does that entail? And this series, what we're going to be doing together now over the course of the next 6-7 months, is really taking up monitoring, evaluation, and learning, and applying a community-led lens to it, and seeing what does it mean to do monitoring, evaluation, and learning through a community-led lens. What is community-led MEL? How do we do it? How do we pull together our expertise? Some of us carry a lot of MEL experience. Some of us carry a lot of community-led development experience. Some of us carry both. How do we bring it all together to really do this so that we can do our work better, but so that we can also challenge the existing norms, ideas around what is knowledge, who has knowledge, who creates knowledge, and how. So that really is the purpose of the Unlearning Lab series. And so we cannot do it without all of you, without your active participation. These sessions are not designed for somebody to come and teach you anything. We are all learning from each other. All of us are just facilitators in this process of knowledge sharing and co-creation. So please speak up, please participate. There are no right or wrong answers in this space. This is a safe space. If you have questions, ask them in the chat. If somebody has asked a question and you have a response to it, please share that as well. You know, we don't have all the answers, but we know that between all of us, we have a lot of answers. So we can crowdsource not just questions and concerns, but also answers. Let's do that together. Finally, the session will be recorded. The recordings, the materials, everything, not just of this session, but of the entire series will be shared with all participants. The way the series will work is that today we are going to do MEL 101. What is that? That is a basic introduction to key terms and ideas in monitoring, evaluation, and learning. And why are we doing it? We're doing it because in order to learn together, we at least need to all speak the same language. And sometimes monitoring, evaluation, and learning can involve a lot of technical terms. So we want to make sure that we unpack these terms together and we have a shared understanding of them. Over the next few sessions, we are going to have about 7 more sessions. We're going to specifically look at different aspects of the MEL cycle. We're going to look at things like theory of change, like data collection, analysis, sense making, reporting back to the community, all of those things. And we are going to see how do we do this? And how do we do this in a manner which is community-led, not organization outsider-led? So that's what we're going to do throughout the series. And that's something for us to keep at the back of our heads as we go through today's session, that this is for all of us to arrive at a common understanding of some of the technical jargon, especially because I know a lot of our smaller members, CBOs, community-based organizations, already do a lot of this work. Monitoring and evaluation is very intuitive because it's about learning, and all of us are learning all the time, but we don't think we are doing it because we believe it's something very, very technical. So part of this is to make sure that all of us are comfortable with this terminology so that we can go through the next few months together. With that, I would actually love to hand this over to our 2 facilitators for today and Sarah, can we launch a quick poll while I invite Pablo and Francis in? So a quick poll to just get a sense of how many people in the room are actually familiar with monitoring and evaluation. And you will see the poll come up on your screen soon. Also, as a reminder, for those of you who need French interpretation, please click on the interpretation channel and select French as your language. Are we able to launch? Oh. Okay, for whatever reason, the polls are not launching. We will keep trying.
It just was launched, and then I think it got like clicked again and it unlaunched. I think it closed, but it was up.
Okay, maybe let me stop share and that will help as well.
Yeah, I was able to respond to the poll. I did see it go up.
Oh, you did see it go up?
Yeah, same. I didn't get to finish it though, before it went away.
Oh.
Finished.
Okay, so we will keep trying to figure that out. But in the meantime, I'm going to hand this over to Pablo Sanchez and Francis Mesah from the Hunger Project, who are really going to be facilitating today's session. Thank you so much, Pablo and Francis. Over to you.
Yes. Sarah, could you enable me to share my screen?
Yes, sorry about that.
No, no worries. Okay, I see. Great. Okay, is my screen appeared? Yes. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yep.
Okay, great. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here with you all and to be part of this first session in this unlearning lab series. And so the purpose of today is really a session on MEL 101, kind of an introductory conversation. The hope is, and the way Francis and I have really planned around this, is to just have an open and low stakes conversation on some key elements of monitoring, evaluation, and learning. So concepts that we think are kind of essential to applying these strategies within a development context. But as Gunjan noted, we don't self-identify as MEL experts in a general sense. Really, I think both Francis and I consider ourselves just fellow practitioners in the spectrum of people who apply these methods, who are also constantly learning and are actually really excited to learn from each of you today as well. So hopefully you can kind of think of this discussion as a series of prompts. And so please feel free to jump in freely, add your own experience. We don't have any pressure to cover everything. We do have quite a bit of information that we do want to share, but there's no pressure to cover it all. You'll have access to the slides after. So if you do have a question or comment, please feel free to jump in as needed. And we'll talk a little bit about the intended outcomes in a bit, but I think the overall intention is really collectively for us to deconstruct maybe what about MEL feels intimidating to some, maybe aspects of MEL that make it feel unattainable for an organization that doesn't have a dedicated MEL person, and deconstruct what might make it feel unfamiliar, because as Gunjan mentioned, so much of what is built into MEL and kind of research in general is really intuitive, and it's a very human process. And so hopefully we can highlight some of that, but not just us collectively. So we'll jump into introducing ourselves, and I'll hand it off to my colleague, Francis, to introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Pablo. Thank you to all the organizers and all those who have joined as we take this journey together. And I bring you greetings from Ghana as well. My name is Francis Osei-Mesah. I've been working with the Hunger Project Ghana since 2010. So 13 years experience in the field of monitoring, evaluation, and learning. And my background is in development management, as well as planning, monitoring, and evaluation. Thank you very much.
Great. And my name is Pablo Sanchez. I work for the Hunger Project as well, based in the US. And I'm currently the Associate Director of Data and Analytics at the Hunger Project. I'm based out of New York, but a lot of my role is dedicated to supporting our colleagues that are based in our implementing countries. So Francis and I are part of the same team. And although we're based in very different locations, but a lot of my job is dedicated to setting up data management and analysis systems. So the tools that help us kind of facilitate aspects of our work. And I've been working with the Hunger Project since 2019, so just over 4 years. And I have a background in sociology and in data science. And so just a little bit of what our path is today, our discussion path. So what we hope to cover, or sort of the intended coverage is, one, we'll start off with approaching MEL terminology in a very lived sense, in an approachable sense. So kind of deconstructing a bit of the jargon around MEL, just so we can all have the same terms. Then the hope is to progress towards understanding what the logical progression is within a MEL cycle. So why MEL cycles and structures are set up in the way that they are, and kind of the direction that they move in. Then we'll share some strategies that we wanted to recommend for how you might approach monitoring, evaluation, and learning without a dedicated MEL specialist in your organization. And so this was one of the context notes that was given to us, is that there may be people on the call who don't have a dedicated MEL person in their organization. So we wanted to offer some insights and some recommendations, and then obviously field any ideas that anyone else has as well. And then have really a discussion or reflection together on what needs to be unlearned in the context of MEL, kind of things that maybe contribute to that feeling of it being unattainable or intimidating or unfamiliar. And then what can we relearn in this process? And I think a lot of this is trying to set up later conversations that will be touched upon in the series, but hopefully introducing some of those themes and topics. And then we'll wrap up and see if there are any questions and share some final thoughts.
Yeah, so looking forward in terms of expectation or intended outcomes, if we feel MEL is an important part of program implementation or project implementation, then there is also the possibility to build some comfort around MEL, the processes and terminologies. So that's what we are looking at. But at the end of the day, we will be able to feel comfortable around MEL discussions, how to go about it, and all that. And then the basic logic that underlines MEL, where does it lead to? That is one interest that we have. And of course, to impart confidence in terms of implementing MEL strategy, and then building up that confidence that is attainable. So these are outcomes that we are looking at.
So again, to help us build kind of a shared understanding of, especially of some of the concepts we want to cover later on, we just want to talk through some MEL terms and try and strip away some of the jargon. And so, it's ironic, but maybe jargon is also a word that we're not really familiar with the exact definition of. I know I wasn't. And so if you didn't know, jargon means special words or expressions that are used in a particular profession or group and are difficult for others to understand. And so there is even an implied exclusiveness when we talk about jargon, which means that, or sort of implies that it requires some type of special knowledge reserved for experts in a particular area. And I think just a core theme is we want to disrupt this idea. MEL concepts, again, are actually really relatable, and they're actually practices that we already integrate in everyday scenarios. And so hopefully we'll sort of walk through some of that together. So we picked out, and obviously this list could have been much longer, and the intention was to make it shorter, but we picked out 11 terms we feel are more or less essential when building your understanding of monitoring, evaluation, and learning, or MEL. And our hope is to impart some familiarity by grounding these in what I hope is a relatable scenario. So let's take a step back and consider that maybe we're all on a fitness journey. So everyone, I think, is in sort of a constant effort to get healthier. And so we're on this fitness journey. And our goal is just to improve our overall health and maybe our mental resilience as well, our sort of confidence. And we're going to try and do that through running a marathon. And so a full marathon, which if you didn't know, was 40 kilometers or 26.2 miles. So it's quite the distance. In the picture here is a person named Eliud Kipchoge. If you weren't familiar, he's widely considered the greatest marathon runner ever. He has won multiple big marathons, and he actually has the world record for running the fastest marathon in just 2 hours and 1 minute, which is crazy. That's not our goal. In this scenario, we're really just aiming for sustained good health, physically and mentally. So this is our scenario, and this is how we'll try and sort of apply these terms. So, yeah, go ahead, Francis.
Yeah, so we will begin discussion around some of the key terms when we talk about monitoring, evaluation, and learning. And then one of the regular terms that you come across is the monitoring. People have different perspective of what monitoring means. Sometimes people consider it to be policing. Sometimes people consider it to be following up and all that. But in basic understanding, it's just about regularly checking on something. It's something that we do often in our homes, with our children, with any projects that we are carrying out. So in MEL, monitoring involves routinely collecting information to track progress towards goals and objectives. So if we consider the marathon example that we are making use of in marathon training, then we could consider monitoring simply as keeping to the run logs. The run logs we keep in a journal or track via a running app. All right, so every day as we are practicing this marathon, how do we keep any records of it at all? Are we monitoring how things are going? What are we jotting down? All right, so that is simply monitoring. Right, the run log keeps a record of the number of rounds as well as other metrics potentially to help understand implementation of our plan. All right, so maybe today I did 6, tomorrow I did 7, the next day I did 10. So that is simply keeping track how something is progressing. All right, so that is monitoring.
Right. The next key term is evaluation. So the second word in the acronym for MEL. And evaluation in really simple terms is just a structured way of kind of understanding how something is working and hopefully why it's working well or not and how it can be improved. And so it's kind of this idea of taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture and trying to make judgments on based on that assessment. And so in this marathon scenario, in our process, in our sort of fitness journey, evaluation would be like taking a step back and looking at some of the data that you're collecting on your training, maybe a few months after you started, and trying to understand if what you're trying to do is actually effective in preparing you to reach this goal. So you're trying to understand the outcomes. So maybe your physical fitness level, how prepared you feel for the actual marathon, and then also the overall impact, and the impact being not the completion of the marathon, but rather how you feel in terms of your overall health, how you feel in terms of confidence. And so it's just a way of us trying to understand if we're really moving in the direction that we want to, and if not, hopefully get some insights in terms of what might not be working well and how we can adapt, which really feeds into the next concept.
Pablo, 1 second before we
Yes.
go ahead. Can you go back, please?
Yes.
Thank you. I was just wondering if we can ask people in the room also how they think about monitoring, evaluation, and learning before we move on to some of these definitions, because I'm sure people have very different ideas based on where they are. So,
Yeah.
Thank you.
There's also some great responses. We don't have time to go through all of them, but that are happening in the chat box.
Oh yeah, feel free to point that out, or if anybody wants to jump in with comments. I don't think I can see the chat box from the share view. So, but yeah, does anyone want to weigh in on their understanding, or anything that they'd want to add to kind of a simple understanding of monitoring and evaluation?
Or also just simply if this is different from what they thought of it, or if they understand it a little differently.
Yeah.
Would be very curious.
Yeah, I think, Robert, you have your hand up.
Yeah, it seems to me that without monitoring and evaluation, you'll never know if your strategies are producing the desired result or not.
Yeah. I think that's it. And I think part of the idea, and what we're not digging deep into here, is that there are degrees of structure that you can add to that process, right? I think we do that constantly anyway. You know, we're giving kind of these examples of run logs or apps that you could use to track your run, for example. But you could also keep a mental record, and that's much less structured, much maybe harder to reference and sort of track. But it is a form of self-monitoring that we do. And we'll talk a little bit about qualitative assessments as well, and I'm sure this will be a topic later on. But you checking in on how you feel after a run is also a way of evaluating progress, or maybe after a few weeks, if you feel like things are getting better. And so, you know, these are familiar concepts. I think in the way that we want to apply it in a development context, we're sort of forced in a direction where we need more structure, where it needs to be a little bit less subjective. It pushes us more into the space of building evidence and something that's shareable. But, you know, the idea is that these are sort of very human processes. You know, we're constantly making these types of judgments.
Yeah. Thank you. This is Albert.
Yes, please, Albert.
I love the way you bring it up in the sense of athletics and physical fitness levels. I think that is very, very illustrative enough and clear. And I would like to give my input or my thoughts about monitoring and evaluation. That it is one process that happens at every level. It's important to understand that monitoring can start, actually it starts from the input level, and then the activity level. Are your inputs speaking to the activities that you planned? Are they rhyming together? And then at the output level, what are the activities producing? Is it what was planned? And then at the outcome level also, the output speaking into the outcomes. Where is the problem? And then I also wanted to find out if it is okay to include accountability in the equation, because while you monitor and evaluate, like what we do, somehow we also give accountability. We look at what we speak back to either the partners or the beneficiaries at the community level or the staff that are doing that work, they report back. Reporting is a way of giving an accountability. And then while we report back, then we run into the last item, which is the learning. The report should be speaking into what worked and what did not work. What should be sustained, what should be dealt away with, what should be improved, what should be removed, and stuff like that. So I was suggesting that as we move across with the MEL, we also add the aspect of accountability so that we call it MEL. And then that we will lead it down into the grassroots at the community level, so that as we monitor, we are involving them and we are also getting information from them while we feed information to them. And then that is a way of accountability. Thank you so much.
I think that's a great suggestion, Albert. And I think it pushes us more in the direction of the integration of community-led principles into MEL as well. And so I think sometimes that's articulated through accountability. I know sometimes the A stands for adaptation as well, in some cases, but I think that there's a lot of overlap between what you're saying and also the concepts around integrating community-led principles into MEL. So hopefully that's something we'll touch on. At the Hunger Project, we haven't yet adopted the A, but it is something that's in discussion. But I think as you said, it's sort of embedded within the learning piece as well. So, how are you sharing some of those outcomes? Which brings us to the next term that we'll talk through is learning. So I'll hand it to Francis.
Yeah, thank you, Pablo. I think I like the fact that even some of the things that members have mentioned are already addressing the issue of learning as part of monitoring and evaluation. And I think Sharida posted in the chat, how is evaluating that something isn't working well rewarded in the development system? It feels like positive findings will lead to more funding, whereas negative evaluation would be important for learning and improving policies or programs. And I think that in our everyday work, especially those who are involved in evaluating projects and all that, often program managers or coordinators are concerned, are we going to have successes? Are we going to have some positive impact and all that? So I think that brings us to the aspect of learning, which is a key purpose of monitoring and evaluation, all right, which refers to the process of understanding and applying insight from monitoring and evaluation data to improve future work. Yes, so we are all interested in successes, but continuously we explore how we can improve what we do. And that is why we do monitoring and evaluation. So it's about using past successes and failures to drive continuous improvement. And that is a learning aspect of monitoring and evaluation. So I'm already excited about where we are heading towards. Pablo.
Yes.
So we're looking at the example of the marathon champion, where you are looking at continuous monitoring and reflecting on patterns and outcomes of your training. And then eventually what works and what doesn't work. So maybe the learning can inform how you schedule your trainings, how you optimize the regime for better results and all that. So continuous monitoring and evaluation will give you feedback, and then it basically tells you what is working, what is not working, and how best you can improve. Yeah.
Okay. And so kind of a key mechanism within MEL strategies to be able to understand or kind of create opportunities for learning is this idea of intervaled evaluations. And so really collecting data at specific points at different parts of a project or a program. And this is often expressed through a baseline, which would be at the beginning of a project or even before, ideally, a project starts. a midline, which is at some point in the middle, and then an end line, which ideally is towards the end of the project or at the very end. And the idea is really you get these reference points to conduct data collection that give you a sense of how much things are changing, if at all, and in what direction. And so these are kind of key learning opportunities that you create within a strategy to be able to assess whether things are progressing or not. And so within this scenario, again, our training for the marathon, this would be really taking measurements at different points throughout your training and trying to see if things like speed, the speed at which you're running, the distance, maybe your heart rate or your resting heart rate, your weight, if these things are changing over the progression of your training, and if they are, could indicate that you're moving in the right direction and that the plan that you're implementing is effective. If they're not, it's an opportunity to adjust and maybe take an assessment of what needs to be adapted. And so it's the same idea with project or program implementation. The purpose is really learning. These are mechanisms to enable us to have learning conversations.
Yeah, that takes us to the next term, that is indicator. And I think that you cannot do monitoring and evaluation without looking at what an indicator is. So probably we can pause here and then find out from colleagues what they think about indicators. When we mention indicator, what comes in mind and how you understand indicator. So I think that Pablo, we can open it up for colleagues to share briefly on the idea of what an indicator is before we move on.
Yeah. Does anyone want to take a stab or even just share their impression of what an indicator could mean, or what it means to you, really? How have you applied this concept? And it could be within the context of your work or just kind of an everyday understanding of the idea of an indicator.
Can I come in?
Please, yes, Albert, go.
Thank you so much. To me, in simple terms, most of us, I think, on this call are drivers. When you're about to get off the road, there is an indicator you show. There is a signpost along the road that points you to where you're going. So an indicator to me is that aspect, or a means to measure where you want to be and what will show that you're actually either getting there or you are getting very far off. So in case, for example, you are meeting 10 community members, the indicator would be the number of community members you're going to meet. So if there are 6, then you are 60% achieving the output, which means it's an activity indicator or it's an output indicator. So that is simply how I can put it across.
Wow, that is excellent, and also adds to my understanding. I think indicator also kind of points in a direction, right? When you say, I'm going to indicate something to someone, you're kind of pointing them in a direction. And so I think that's a great analogy. Thank you so much, Albert.
Pablo, there is something in the chat which I just wanted to flag because it's very poetic. It's something Facundo said. Indicator is a lighthouse that guides our ship towards the port.
That's an amazing analogy. Thank you, Facundo. And I didn't see you were on the call. Welcome. I think that's a great analogy as well. It sort of gives us a sense of direction again, as a way to sort of understand whether or not we're moving maybe in the intended direction. So kind of like, again, Albert, I really like the idea of sort of a road sign. Very good.
Yeah, Pablo, so I think we also have one from Shema. The performance indicator reference sheet comes to my mind when I see an indicator. Also, the smart way, all right? And then we have another example from Robert. If I'm on a diet, I will measure my weight. If I'm running, I will measure my speed. All right. So I think these are great examples of what indicators are. Often when I engage with community partners and then I'm explaining indicators, and I usually will go like, so if you want to talk about the fact that somebody is poor or somebody is rich, what are some of the key pointers? And they will be amazed by the indicators that the community partners will bring out. All right, the example of the traffic light is also a great example. And then, okay, so indicator is a measurable or appreciable element, allowing to consider the evolution of a process compared to a known reference. Wow, that is powerful. All right, so normally when we talk about the issue of monitoring and evaluation, then people will ask, what am I monitoring? What am I going to evaluate? So what gives us an idea of what we are looking at is basically an indicator. So without an indicator, we cannot carry out monitoring and evaluation. So it's a sign or a clue that shows us if change is happening. So think about it. If you are monitoring or you are evaluating any project, whether water project, health project, what can you look at that gives you an indication that you are making progress or you are not making progress, all right? So when we go to the example of our marathon training, then we are talking about maybe a piece of data that gives you an idea of how well you are doing towards your goal of preparing for the marathon. So maybe you are looking at the speed, you are looking at the heart rate or the heartbeat, you are looking at the distance. So all these are examples of indicators. If you are looking at the marathon training example. Yeah.
Great.
Pablo, there is a question in chat on indicators, which I think is a fantastic one. And I know from your presentation, it's something you may want to address.
Okay.
It's from Nandini Sridhar, and she says, are indicators always quantitative?
No, absolutely not. And we'll touch upon sort of a general understanding of quantitative versus qualitative, but a qualitative measure, for example, in this marathon training program could be how you're feeling, and we mentioned that at some point. It's not a quantitative measure. You could quantify maybe like a scale of 1 to 10. How are you feeling? You can also express it in terms of words, and both serve different purposes and add different understanding. And we'll touch on it a little bit, but the quantitative could tell you sort of the number of things, how much or how many, but qualitative really gives you a kind of depth that you can't obtain through quantitative measures, like the why and the how, which is a very critical set of questions when we're trying to assess the effectiveness of something, or really get a deeper understanding of why something has occurred. So it doesn't always have to be quantitative. There are certainly qualitative indicators that we could and should integrate into an effective MEL strategy. Obviously, there are some caveats to both and limitations, but yeah, I hope that helped answer your question. And thank you, Gunjan. Yeah, if there are any other questions that you want to point out, please let us know. We'll pause and do our best to respond.
Yeah, and also just for everyone, there are great points and discussions happening on chat. We will consolidate it all later for everybody, but this is very helpful, so continue. And Pablo, I will point out for you and Francis, because I know you can't screen share and monitor chat at once.
Right. So we'll move on to outputs, and we have had some folks mention, even reference some outputs or outputs in general in their comments. Does anyone want to share their understanding of outputs before we share ours? Anyone want to offer an insight on their understanding of output? And really output as sort of a category of indicators, but does anyone want to share? If somebody is sharing in the chat, I won't be able to see, but I'm sure it's great.
And yet,
Okay, so we can share our understanding of output is really, and I think Albert, you kind of mentioned it word for word. It's really the ability to measure something immediate and tangible in terms of products or services that are delivered as a result of your activity. So they're kind of the results of a direct activity that you're implementing, and something that ideally is measurable and helps you understand the tasks that you're completing. And so they're kind of that first level of indicator typically to help us understand direct implementation often. And within our marathon analogy, outputs could be the completion of your weekly training logs or your weekly runs. So as per your schedule, each run you complete could be considered an output, a direct result of the activity. So the activity being the act of running according to your plan. And as Francis mentioned during monitoring, typically what we're monitoring during that monitoring phase for a project or a program, or really monitoring being spread throughout a program cycle, are typically outputs. You know, how are we implementing our plan? How often? That will then help us understand later on the effectiveness of those efforts through some of the other indicator categories and the evaluations that we implement.
Yeah. So from output, usually we hear about outcomes, and often we ask, okay, so there's several trainings, the fundings, the activities that you have carried out. What is next? So what? You have done all these things. What is happening as a result of the things that you have done? So sometimes we classify them. We say short-term outcomes, long-term outcomes, intermediate outcomes, and all that. And we talk about maybe 3 to 5 years after implementing a project and all that. So outcomes are the changes or benefits that happen as a result of what you are doing. So if we are using a garden, for instance, maybe the outcome could be vegetables or flowers that grow as a result of, planting them. All right. So if you visit our friend, if we are considering the marathon training, one outcome that will be expected is that there will be improvement in cardiovascular health. All right. So after doing all this marathon training, is there another level of benefit that we can talk about aside seeing you running, and improvement in health? So that is an outcome. So beyond the output, what should we expect? What is the result of all that?
Great. And kind of the third tier of indicator category is impact. And impact is a much more maybe familiar term than output in sort of our day-to-day language, or even outcome, which is kind of replaceable with a lot of words. But how would you, in your own words, define impact? You know, what does impact mean to you in everyday terms, or maybe even a deeper understanding? Hopefully we get a volunteer for this one, because I do think this one is a more familiar word, but does anyone want to offer a perspective?
and Pablo, we actually got a lot of responses that came in later about outputs.
Okay, great.
So I think people were just taking some time to put it together.
Okay, awesome.
And share.
Does anyone want to just share any thoughts on what they feel out or impact means? Yeah, Facundo. Oh, you're muted.
I'm sorry. Nice to see you again here, and I hope my English is proper for all of you. But I think when I think in impact level, I think in change of behaviors, really change of behaviors that we can find out through our projects. And I see like we have like the past years is the sum of the outputs get us to the outcome. Is that something that we can establish, or there are some gaps between outputs and outcome, you know, to reach the impact that we are finding or looking at? So when I think in impact, I think in change of behavior that we objective can follow up.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and if you think about changes in behavior, they're kind of big changes, right? It's not just getting someone to participate in a training, for example. It's really what happens as a result of that training. It's kind of this higher level change that we're trying to see. Yeah, I totally agree, Facundo. Thank you. Tussaud, I think. Yes.
Beranger.
Oh, Beranger. Yes, please, Beranger, share.
Merci. Bonjour à tous. Je vais y aller en français. Pour ce qui me concerne, l'impact, si je prends le cas d'un projet, l'impact pour moi, c'est le résultat durant le projet. Qu'est-ce qui sera réellement le résultat qu'on va atteindre? Comment est-ce que les communautés seront atteintes? Quelle est l'action, la consistance de l'action que le projet a résolu au sein de la communauté? Vous voyez, l'impact en réalité, c'est cela. C'est le résultat final, au fait. Quand le projet a été réalisé, qu'est-ce qu'on va remarquer au sein de la communauté? Qu'est-ce qui sera laissé comme trace pour le fait que ce projet a été réalisé dans cette communauté? Pour moi, c'est ce que j'entends par impact, si je prends le cas d'un projet qui a été réalisé. C'est ça l'impact. Les traces laissées par un projet réalisé dans une communauté. Merci.
Merci, Beranger. Would anyone be able, I'm sorry, I don't speak French. Sarah or someone offer just a summary of Beranger's comment?
Yes, I could do that.
Oh, thank you so much, Pascal. Yeah.
Yes, briefly. From Beranger's point of view, impact, I traduce exactly what he said, is result expected. How the community change. What is the final result? What is visible once the project comes to an end? What can be seen after then? Briefly, that's what Beranger said.
Amazing. Totally agree. Thank you so much, Beranger. And I think and thank you, Pascal, for sharing the translation. I think that leads us into the way Francis and I also interpreted it. It's really thinking about the big long-term change that happens as a result of your work. So again, using a gardening example, impact might be creating a sustainable food source for your family or improving the local ecosystem. So it's much larger than just the fruits that are directly born from, you know, your efforts to plant. It's kind of the effects of those results. And so I think it's easy, even in the example that we're using of marathon training, to think, oh, the impact of our training program is our completion of the marathon. It's actually bigger than the completion of the marathon, even though that's a big achievement. It's the effects of of achieving that goal. So the idea is not we're trying to just complete this marathon and that's it. It's really, we're trying to integrate better lifestyle choices, more physical fitness in a sustained way, more mental resilience and maybe self-confidence in a sustained way. And so there are much bigger changes that we're trying to achieve as a result of that middle level result. And so again, so in the context of marathon training, the impact would be a sustained healthy lifestyle, increased self-esteem, or even inspiring others to in your life to take up running or exercise. So it's the effects of a much larger change. And so I intentionally chose an older looking man to kind of imply this idea that perhaps he's someone who ran his first marathon years ago, but was able to sustain this change through the integration of that habit. So it's a much larger change that we're looking for.
Yeah, so I think that the issue of quantitative data and qualitative data already came out. In monitoring and evaluation, we do collect a lot of information. And sometimes the information we collect, we classify them as quantitative data because they deal with numbers. So basically, we'll be looking at numerical data, like the number of food produced as an example, the height of a plant. We look at percentages of seedlings that survive, records of amount of rainfall received each month. So quantitative data has to do with numerical information that has to do with numbers or percentages or proportions that we collect to just guide us to be able to know trends or to see our progress. Right? So if we are looking at the marathon training as an example, some of the numerical data that might be collected might include the running speed, the distance covered, the heart rate, and others. And this data can be easily measured and compared over time to track changes and progress. So maybe when I started, I was covering 5 kilometers. And now at the same speed, I'm able to cover 3 kilometers. So you'll be able to measure to compare. Right? So that's the idea of quantitative data, which is a key component of monitoring and evaluation.
Yeah. And so it's kind of, they're often thought about as opposites. I think there's like a kind of binary opposite effect with quantitative and qualitative. And we touched upon it a bit, but I think in its ideal implementation, they both complement each other. And I know that there are later sessions that are planned on sense-making efforts, participatory efforts to integrate dialogue that's kind of informed by data. And so, I'm really excited to be a part of those conversations as well down the road. But to think about them kind of as separate concepts for now, if the quantitative data kind of indicates how much or how many, so things that are sort of countable, the qualitative data again tells us the why and the how, which in a lot of ways is a much more profound set of questions to answer, right? And again, a lot of ways it's also much harder to measure. So in our marathon analogy, this would be like keeping a journal perhaps through your process about how you feel after each training run. How hard did it feel? How did you feel emotionally after? What parts of it were most challenging or most enjoyable? These are kind of things that are much more difficult to track in a quantifiable sense, but are actually really critical questions to answer to know whether or not, one, your training program is effective, but two, if it's sustainable. If you're not enjoying the process that you're employing, the implication is that maybe you won't keep it going post marathon. And the real goal is for you to sustain that physical wellness and mental wellness. So these are actually really critical questions to integrate into your process. And without answering these questions, you could fail at the desired impact and really not understand why. You followed the training regimen, you logged your trainings, but you didn't keep this effort up. and it's not really clear why. So it gives you a different type of information, but really helps you understand more of the subjective aspects of your training process. And subjective doesn't necessarily mean like less valuable, right? It just means it's more subject to the context. It's kind of more amiable to maybe the person or the environment, but it's still extremely valuable information.
Yeah, so I think a lot of interesting activities going on in the chat box. Maybe we'll have time to address some of them. One of them is the level of enjoyment. Is there quantitative data? Or so often you ask yourself, can you quantify a level of enjoyment or the fun that you are having and all that? So that's interesting. Right? So we will highlight it. We'll highlight it. Yeah. So maybe the next term that we look at, which is also very common when we talk about monitoring and evaluation, is a theory of change, which is also part of the what we call program framework. Sometimes we have what we call the logic models, we have what we call the results framework, and then the theory of change as well. So, for example, what Pablo was talking about earlier, the logic model will basically look at input, activity, output, outcome, and then impact. So the theory of change is the same principle. And the theory of change looks at the roadmap for your project. Where do we want to get to? What is the big change we want to see? And then where are we? What must happen before we get there? All right. So basically, it looks like how plans are clearly outlined. All right. What to do, what changes you expect to see, and how you think those changes will occur. All right. So we look at if this happens, then this can take place. And then we also look at assumptions. It's about thinking through the steps from where you are now to where you want to be. All right. So that's the theory of change. How am I bringing about change? With this idea that I have. Right? So if we are looking at the example of the marathon, then we are looking at, okay, so we understand that we have to have a training program. If I have a training program, which is my activity, then I will improve my cardiovascular fitness and running speed. The running speed is an output, which will enable me to complete a marathon, which is an outcome, and lead to better long-term physical wellness. It's about how I want to have a long-term physical wellness, but where do I start from? And how do I build the blocks to be able to acquire that change that I want to see? Right? So that's the big picture, the theory of change, and how it can happen. Yeah, Pablo.
So typically, theories of change can often, and you know, I know that there's another session on this, so we won't dig too deep into it, but it's kind of this progression of phases. It's kind of this idea that similar to the diagram before, if I do this, then I will get this result. And so it's kind of this progression. There is kind of a logical progression. And so the idea is that, you know, you're starting off maybe with an activity that leads all the way to a higher level result. Typically, though, in a planning process, you wouldn't start with the activity. You would first start with the desired impact. So what is the actual change we're trying to achieve? And so in our fitness scenario, our desired impact could be, and there could be multiple, but could be improved physical fitness and wellness in a sustained way. So maybe we'll add sustain there as well. And which should come as a result of the completion of a marathon. And so the marathon is actually not the desired impact. It's kind of a progression towards that. And our ability to complete a marathon is achieved through increased endurance and speed. And so, you know, we're getting better, which, you know, could be achieved through the implementation of our training program, which could be 4 days of the week, you're applying some type of running. So you can see the progression here of ideas starting from the goal and then kind of working backwards to see how each of these phases of really of data collection, of things that you're observing through the programs, leads all the way back to the core activity or the intervention that you're trying to implement. And so if we're doing it from a planning process, we may work backwards and start from impact and kind of work backwards. But in terms of implementation, it would move in the opposite direction. So once we have kind of a progression in mind, we would actually move up the ladder. And so the activity would lead to the output, which leads to the outcome, which then ultimately leads us to the impact. At least that's the idea. And so sometimes this process is articulated through a framework. And really the difference between this process and a framework is just more details. And just to give us a sense of what other details we can add to this framework that will just help us build more structure into how we observe these changes, how we keep track of these things. It's looking at maybe what we're looking for in each of these phases, but it's also looking at maybe specific indicators, so specific things that we want to measure at each point. So for impact, it could be your body mass index, it could be your resting heart rate, it could be the feeling of mental resilience, confidence. It could be the actual completion of the marathon or a marathon certificate, perhaps. Outputs being the distance and speed, training run logs. We'd also look at the sources of data. So where are we pulling this information from? How are we actually obtaining this information? And then you could also add things like risks and assumptions. And so what factors might inhibit outcomes? What do we presume will happen in order for the result we're looking for to occur? And so for this example in our training scenario, the activity of training, the training program, it could be affected by unforeseen circumstances. So maybe it's hard for us to run 4 days a week because we have very demanding jobs. There's also an assumption that the activity will actually lead to increased endurance. Maybe you're not running long enough. Maybe you're running just 20 minutes at a time and it's not intense enough. So there's something that you need to account for there. Potential injuries might affect your ability to fulfill the marathon or complete the marathon. And just the assumption that actually running a marathon can lead to improved health. So there are assumptions there that we also want to account for that could affect the results that we end up seeing. And so this is all kind of details that you can add to a framework. Logical frameworks or log frames, are often referred to that way as well. You can also add things like targets, who's responsible for collecting, the frequency of collection. At the Hunger Project, log frames have often been used as kind of primary references for program progression and kind of building an understanding of the dimensions of a program or a project. And so they could be really useful even outside of a monitoring, evaluation, and learning sense to understand the design and the intended outcomes of a program. And it's actually a really good exercise, one that we'll give it a shot in a second as well. But just some considerations for logical frameworks or log frames, just as kind of a key concept and resource within a monitoring, evaluation, and learning strategy. They're very commonly used in project planning. They're also sometimes kind of de facto requirements and proposals. And so if you haven't worked directly with one, and you're pursuing funding, it's kind of often integrated into the requirements of trying to structure what your assumed outcomes will be in a program. And essentially it articulates what's to be done and the resulting effects at different levels. And it's kind of putting together a lot of the terms that we covered into this kind of diagram and structure. Some other notes, it's very linear. It assumes kind of a direction of a straight line almost, and it's a little bit one-dimensional. And typical log frames or the structure don't really highlight the iterative process that is part of a MEL strategy. So it doesn't effectively highlight learning, adaptation, and we can also throw in accountability there as well, as you mentioned, Albert. So kind of another way of thinking through this. Yeah, go ahead, Francis.
Yeah. So when we put all this together, we look at it as a cycle, and then it always starts with activity. But we must understand that for every activity to be carried out, there are basically input or resources, what you need to be able to carry it out. So for instance, with a marathon training, you might need a tracking book, you might need a timer, you might need a coach. All these are resources. So once the activity is being carried out, then we are looking at the output. Example of it is the progress in speed, endurance, where we are using monitoring run logs to be able to monitor how things are going. And as we go on, the next sequence, we are looking at outcome. Are we able to complete the marathon? Right. So looking at outcome, then we are look time, distance, comparison, health assessment. So the idea of monitoring is regular. Things that you can follow up, you can check on every day and monitor every day. But outcome, usually with outcome and impact, it relates to evaluation because it's periodic. It's something that you are looking at it, a periodic performance and assessing how you are doing. Right? So it eventually leads us to the impact, which is the improved health and mental resilience that we might be talking about. So what is the learning there? So as we look at the cycle, continuously learning forms part of every aspect of the cycle. When we are doing monitoring, we are learning. When we are doing evaluation, we are learning, all right? So how we can effectively adapt and then ensure that we're able to achieve our plan, all right? So if we are looking at a cycle, there's an example of the whole thing if we put together in the cycle form. Yeah, Pablo?
Great.
Move on. Yeah. So if we are looking at another example like hand washing, then the activity could be the hand washing training. And then we are looking at how many people are attending the training, that is monitoring. But the output, that's the immediate result we see when we carry out the activity is people trained in hand washing. What is the result after the training? And that is the outcome. That is the next level after output. And that is increase in people using proper techniques, proper hand washing techniques. All right. So we get to know that through evaluation studies. All right. So we are studying sanitation, knowledge, and behavior study. And then eventually, we want to reduce the number of people affected by diarrhea disease. All right. So fewer people with diarrhea disease. And that is the impact we are looking at. So in our learning, we will look at the strategy that has been used to implement the activities, the approach. And then with the monitoring and evaluation, we have stakeholders workshop. We are doing sense-making workshop. Sometimes we are interested in knowing the stories behind the numbers. And that is why qualitative data is key. All right, so what are the key learnings for stakeholders? What is the program adaptation story? All right, so this is the example. Yeah.
Great. So we'd actually want to take some time now to break into small groups, and we'd like to just think through this second example a little bit more, this idea of a hand washing campaign, and have each of the groups that are formed just fill out the missing details in this log frame, just as an exercise to kind of think through this process if you haven't done so before, and kind of answer questions like, if we did have to implement this project, what indicators would we choose at each phase? How would we collect this data? What are some risks or assumptions? And what we want to do is, in these groups, you will each get a slide in this slide deck here, and you can just pick an empty slide depending on how many groups, and do your best to just fill out the details that are missing there, and then we'll reconvene and take a look together at what everybody put together. And this is, a practice scenario in a real life context. there could be multiple, there should be really multiple impact indicators and multiple outcome and multiple output, multiple activities that are integrated. So don't feel like you have to cover everything. It's really doing your best to kind of apply an understanding of each of the sections. So I'll actually stop sharing and I will share the link. Oh, was it shared already?
Yes, we can put it again. And the last two slides are the French slides. So for the French speakers, go to the last two slides. The rest are English. So pick any one and just, again, the idea is to start discussing this with your group and to see, we do a lot of this in any case, every day in our work. So it's just driving home that point. So the breakout rooms are 10 minutes. Between yourselves, decide who will facilitate and put it together. Thank you so much. Sarah, can we launch the breakout groups?
Yep,
And my
they
colleague,
are
Sarah,
open.
thank you. And my colleague, Sarah, is going to be here to help you navigate the Zoom breakout rooms in case you can't figure it out. Six, 12, 8, 6, 1 and 2. Sorry, 2 and 1. Yeah, 1, 2, 6, 8, 12. Pablo.
Great. So let's jump in. It looks like everybody is filing back in, and I think we'll just quickly run through some of the responses. And I'm so happy to see that so many teams were able to fill out. I love that some folks approached kind of attacking the indicator column first, and some worked across. So let's take a look. So slide 1, indicator for impact percent of people reduced with diarrheal disease. Makes sense, absolutely. Percent of people who are reporting an increase in proper hand washing. It's that sort of behavioral measure that you would want to see at that outcome level. And I think that's exactly the indicator you'd want to track. Number of people trained, number of hand washing. Excellent. This is very consistent with what we ended up writing. I'm very interested in the risks and assumptions because I think this is the toughest piece, but it's actually a very critical piece for understanding the types of results you might get. I know this fits a lot within other types of MEL frameworks, is more accountability to some of the other environmental factors that influence the outcomes. So one of the risks or assumptions could be displacement of people from coverage area. And that's an excellent observation. You know, the assumption with evaluations is often that you're surveying people who are within the impact area, right? People who would have felt the effects of the intervention. Sometimes that is a bad assumption because people move or people are displaced, new people move into the communities. And so those kinds of things can affect the way you interpret results. Let's look at another one. So for output, number of people trained, great. Data source could be the participant list, excellent, or the attendance lists. And the invited attendance will attend all the sessions as planned. Yeah, that's great. So maybe there are people, we do train 800 people, but maybe only half of them attended all of the trainings. So there is sort of an incomplete experience there. Excellent. Let's jump to another one. Anything you want to add to those, Francis? Any observations?
Yeah, I think usually is the risks and assumptions, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah, usually. But the basic understanding is what could affect your expected results at each level. So that's the thinking. Is there something that must happen to get the right result, or is there any external factor that could affect your result? But the indicator will normally be an open indicator. So for instance, if you say a percentage of people with fewer diarrhea diseases, then you're already defining a downward trend for the indicator. So usually the indicator should be standard, just to measure whether increase or decrease. So don't add the decrease or the increase to the indicator. We leave it open to see what happens. And I mean, just a few comments.
Great. Does anyone, I don't want to skip over the French just because of my lack of French ability, but does anyone want to share maybe some observation from the French side? Or something that they want to note in particular?
Pascal, Sarah, could we ask one of you to just help us with that? Oh, Paul is speaking in the English channel.
Oh, let's see.
Okay, so if everyone switches, if you switch on your English interpretation, then you can actually hear Paul translating from French to English for us.
Hold on.
Oh, Pablo, can you share the screen? I think he was reading from the screen.
Oh, sorry. Okay, great. I won't be able to hear him, but that's okay.
Thank you so much, Paul. Pablo, back to you.
Okay, great. Unfortunately, I missed it, but I trust that it was amazing because I also know I've met Paul and I know he has many other areas of expertise aside from translation. So thank you so much, Paul, for jumping in there. Great. So we're going to power through some of these other sections just in the interest of time and to be able to give enough space for some conversation. This was our interpretation of that same framework using the example of this hand washing campaign. And I'm happy to say that it's very consistent with what other groups put. And I think the fact that there was so much consistency in the examples, and you guys will have access to the exercise slides as well, I think denotes that there is a logic to it, that there is kind of a familiarity with how to progress through some of these concepts. And I would encourage you to kind of embrace this as a thinking exercise as well when thinking through programs. I think these categories help us add structure and make sure we're hitting some details, but also just embrace that there is an intuitiveness to the way we think about this progress, and it's really this activity in trying to understand the effects of our actions and seeing if we're moving in the direction that we want. So great. Francis, did you want to touch quickly on where MEL fits within the project cycle?
Yeah, so usually we'll be discussing the program implementation and then what's the place of MEL. So normally we look at the initiation of the idea, the design of the project or the strategies, look at how we adapt as we are going on. But right from the idea conception and then the project implementation, monitoring plays a critical role. Because just as the program begins implementation, the various activities are running, the monitoring takes place. And as we go on, periodically, we are looking at the outcomes, we are looking at the impact. So evaluation also comes there. And then we have learning and feedback sessions. So it's a continuous cycle of collaborating, leveraging with other partners, adapting, and then learning as we aim at the results we want to get. So basically, that's a cycle. And then MEL starts from program implementation. You know, the MEL system itself should be part of the project design. But once the project implementation starts, MEL also kicks off. Thank you.
Excellent. So now that we have some of the core concepts, we're going to quickly run through some recommended strategies on how you might approach MEL without a dedicated MEL person. We won't be able to go into some of the scenarios that we prepared, and we'll just quickly touch on the strategies because we want to get to some of the discussion. So we'll quickly share, but again, everyone will have these slides for their own reference and kind of dig into the recommended strategies. But the first would be very simply investing in training for existing staff. So maybe you don't have a dedicated MEL person, but everyone can go through MEL trainings. And you know, again, I think this is a good first step to sort of, if there was some unfamiliarity with the concepts, is starting with some familiarity on some of the essential terms and then building upwards. A collaborative approach, so maybe dividing the responsibilities of MEL among different team members, and in some cases there's kind of a natural progression. For example, project coordinators may already keep track of activities and activity logs and attendances. So, you know, there's a natural avenue for people in project coordinator positions to maybe keep track of the trainings, or even just the facilitators for given trainings or workshops or activities. Leverage technology. This is an area I'm very passionate about, is using technology, but in a very accessible and non-complicated way. There's a great quote by, I think, Leonardo da Vinci, that simplicity is the highest form of sophistication. So simple tools, things that are accessible, things that are ideally free and open source. So, you know, SurveyMonkey isn't, but Google Forms is fairly accessible. There are other data collection tools out there that they're very straightforward to use. You don't need a special software to analyze data. Sometimes the simplest tools and the ones that are accessible are the best. Trying to integrate MEL dialogue into the way you discuss programs and projects. So, you know, running through a log frame is actually a great exercise for a team trying to build an understanding of what the intentions are for a project or an intervention. And so you don't have to label it as MEL, but it could be something that sort of builds on MEL concepts or tools that helps build an understanding, and kind of acknowledging that MEL is integrated into the project cycle. It should go hand in hand. So if you're talking about MEL, you should be talking about a program, you should be talking about a project cycle. They should go hand in hand, because really MEL should be reflective of the projects and programs being implemented. then Francis.
Yeah, so as part of the recommended strategies, we also think that partnerships and networks could really be of great advantage if we are seeking to promote MEL in our organizations. And I think that especially for the movement for community-led development, where we are bringing together organizations, networks, coalitions, I think that the needed support or resources for MEL is available. And it's a great opportunity for peer learning, sharing best practices, maybe pooling resources together if there's the need to have a hired MEL consultant for such project. And then we are also encouraging that we keep it simple and relevant. MEL, as we probably have gone through today, is not a complex subject. We just have to fall in love with it and then feel comfortable around it. If we want it to be complicated, it can be complicated, where we are trying to measure all sort of things from with complex tools and all that, but we can really keep it simple and measuring what is relevant. And then the practice of making use of data for decision making. I think another thing people probably might not have prioritized MEL, because in one angle it is done, in another angle it is very distant from managers or decision makers. But that's a purpose for MEL, to be able to make use of data for informed decision making and strategy development. All right. So if you want to talk about MEL, then we need to push for using it for decision making, and then also encouraging the culture of celebrating success and then failures. All right, we must have an open, honest, accountable discussion when MEL comes in, and that is when we are able to do an effective work. And even with the challenges or the failures, we know that we can learn from them to improve our programming. Yeah.
So there are some scenarios here for you to consider. We won't go through them today, just in the interest of time. And we'll actually, I think we'll jump forward to the poll questions, if that's okay, Gunjan, and because that will help us lead into just the wrap-up question. So could we launch the poll questions?
And let's try and see if it works. The polls didn't really work last time. Can anyone see the poll questions or something coming up? Nope.
No.
Not yet.
Not yet.
I
All
do
right.
see-
Do you want to put the polls? Oh, here it is. It's here.
No.
This was the. Oh yeah.
This is the last poll. So this is what people had answered. Maybe we stop this, Sarah, and we talk about, we'll send this to people, but let's look at the next poll, which is our concluding poll.
If that doesn't work, Gunjan, maybe we can just put the question and options in the chat box and people can respond that way.
Oh,
the poll's up.
Great.
Okay, technology does work eventually.
Excellent. Okay. Great. So just take a few minutes, or less than a minute if possible, and answer this poll question. And the two questions that you see there. Which the first one is, what do you think is our biggest assumption about MEL that we need to unlearn? And the second being, do you feel communities can carry out monitoring, evaluation?
Just to add that this is kind of taking us back to where we started and the purpose of this series, because remember, this was supposed to be a MEL 101. Pablo and Francis were helping us come to a shared understanding of some of the MEL terms and jargons and laying a common foundation. But really what we do now is looking at community-led MEL and how is that done. beginning the next session onwards. And so this poll is a segue into a couple of things we will be telling you about the series going forward. So bear with us a few more minutes. We do have a couple more slides to talk about the series in general after this.
Maybe when we get to about 50%, we'll pause and see if
Yeah, we have about 13 respondents.
okay.
Pablo.
Let's talk through, and as people respond, the remaining people will see how the score changes. But can you guys see my screen there? Can you see the results of the poll?
Oh, I can screen. Can you? I can screen share to show people the results.
Okay, yeah. Would you like to do that?
I have to see how to do that. Give me a second. Technology is not my strongest point. Well, it seems to show you. I may have to end the poll.
Okay. Well, if you want to see the poll results, you can also click at the bottom of your screen. You should see polls right next to the chat icon, and it should open up the poll results. But we can also quickly talk through it. So to the first question, what do you think is our biggest assumption about MEL that we need to unlearn? It seems like the most popular response was that MEL is more about accountability to funders than improving our work, which is something that I think I deeply resonate with as well. Though I think there is a shift occurring within MEL that is moving us more towards, again, Albert's comment, towards accountability, not just to our funders, but to our community partners, which I think is, again, a core concept and theme of this series. So I agree. The second most popular response to this, the biggest assumption that we need to unlearn, seems to be MEL is too complex to understand. Hopefully today made some progress against that. I think, again, I love the way Francis put it. We can make it as complicated as we want, but kind of making the concepts familiar, focusing on simplicity, and also kind of enjoying the process, which is something that I definitely embrace, is trying to enjoy the exercise of thinking through these projects and the progression and the intentions. It makes it feel a lot more attainable. And there is a whole community of people who work in this area who also go through a lot of these questions and doubts and feel like sometimes it is too complicated. So, again, we're all on this learning journey together and all sort of offer different levels of expertise in different areas. So the second one, do you feel communities can carry out monitoring and evaluation? The majority of people here agreed and said, yes, they can and they should, and wholeheartedly agree with that. And then the second most was perhaps with our support. And so I think that there is kind of an acknowledgement there that they should, but perhaps there is kind of a capacity gap, or maybe just a knowledge gap, or a confidence and familiarity gap that needs to be bridged, which is also the case for us as well. Awesome. Okay, so I think that may cover the last question. We may wrap up our portion here just to give time for the rest, Gunjan. Any other thoughts you wanted to share, Francis, from your end?
No, I think that globally the concern is that we can do things better. We can always improve the way we do things. It's a continuous learning system, and especially with the work that we do, development field, MEL plays a critically important role, but we need to find a way of making it more lively, so that people will make use of MEL, whether they have MEL specialists or not. I think that in the chat somebody asked if there's the need for really a MEL specialist. It could be yes, it could be no, but with or without, I think that what we are communicating today is that we can embrace the principles of MEL and make it count in our organization. Thank you.
Thank you, Pablo and Francis. This was super helpful. Thank you for facilitating the conversation and kind of starting us off on this journey together. I know people have questions around recordings, around materials, around what happens next. So just give us a couple more minutes while we tackle those questions. We did have another set of polls, which is not working, so I'm not even going to try there, but I am going to try and share my screen. And let me know if you are actually able to see my screen. 1 second. All right. Are you able to look at my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. So what Pablo and Francis really took us through today was MEL 101, and that's how we designed this session to kind of have a common understanding on some of the key steps in the process, some of the key terms and that we associate with MEL. But what we want to really tackle through this series is the MEL cycle, all the way starting with actually development of the theory of change, which you don't see here, through data collection, analysis, validity, taking action, and reporting back to the community. What does that look like when you apply a community-led lens to it? With the basic idea that community-led MEL is not extractive, right? Unlike other forms of MEL where we go to the community to get information from them for our reports, in community-led MEL, it is the community's data, it is information they use to learn to improve the programs that affect their lives. That's kind of the fundamental difference between community-led MEL and MEL. So the one clarification about this series is that we are looking at community-led monitoring, evaluation, and learning. So what's going to happen? In the next session, we're actually going to look at, so we've looked at MEL 101 today. In the next session, we're going to look at what is CLD congruent MEL, what is community-led MEL, and how does it differ from traditional MEL? We're going to look at questions of qualitative and quantitative data, of rigor, of how do we ensure quality of data? Who determines what is good data or bad data? Who determines whether an evaluation is good enough or rigorous enough or not? How do we decide on methods? And what role do communities and community-based organizations have in all of this? So this is just a preview slide. We'll kind of be digging deeper into these questions next session. And after that, like I said, we're going to go back to each one of these segments and look at what it looks like in practice when we are thinking of community-led MEL. So how do we develop a theory of change with the communities, right? How do we enable communities to develop their own theories of change? And how do we work with them and support them? How do we develop indicators with the community? How do we define success with the community? What role does communities have to play in data collection, in data analysis, data validity, actionable, taking action once you do that? All of these segments will be separate sessions, and we're going to delve into literally some of the key steps in community-led monitoring and evaluation or traditional monitoring and evaluation, and we're going to apply a community-led lens to it. We're going to actually, each of the sessions would be 2 hours long, not for this session, but in between the next sessions going forward, there will actually be some reading materials and some amount of work in between sessions, because what our hope and goal is that by the end of this series, we are all doing community-led MEL in our everyday practice. We are actually practicing this. So that's kind of the overall design. All of the content, all the presentations, all the sessions will be in English and French. Our apologies to the Spanish speakers. We haven't been able to arrange that yet. But if you do require a Spanish translation, then get in touch with us and we'll try and figure out how to make this happen. So going forward, we will share the recording after every session. We will share recordings and the slide deck in English and French with you. They will also be in the Unlearning Lab section of the MCLD.org website, just like we will have the first series of Unlearning Lab, Strategic Planning 1 and 2. There, we will also have a specific page dedicated to all resources around this. The conversations we have on chat will enable us to frame the next session. So thank you for your rich inputs there. And finally, a lot of you, when I was looking at the poll results from the first poll, it was amazing how, I don't know if you can still see my screen, but the first, I can't share this. Okay, if we looked at the first poll results, most people here, or almost 60% of the people here actually do MEL as part of their regular work. If that is the case, if you've been thinking about community-led monitoring, evaluation, and learning, or you've been thinking about how to make your monitoring and evaluation practices more community-led, less colonized, get in touch with Nelly and I. We would love to co-create sessions with you. Nelly and I do not facilitate any of these sessions. We just work with you to make sure that we can create the safe space for all of us. And finally, as we go, we want to leave you with some of these questions, which we always ask ourselves in the Unlearning Labs. What do we need to unlearn about monitoring and evaluation in order to be able to do community-led monitoring, evaluation, and learning? So let's think about what are those notions around, as Pablo and Francis said, about how complex it is, about who can do it and who cannot do it, about how specialized it is, but also about questions like, is qualitative good enough? Who decides what is rigorous or not rigorous? Who decides the purpose of monitoring and evaluation? Albert raised an important question today about accountability and its role in monitoring and evaluation. That's something we'll discuss in the next session, definitely. But those are the kind of issues that we should be thinking about as we go through these Unlearning Labs together. And with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen so that I can see the registration link for the next sessions. You will get them all on an email along with the recording, but it will also be on the Unlearning Labs webpage. It's not there yet, but it will be there shortly. We are hoping to do monthly sessions. One of the things we would have loved to ask you in the polls would have been, what is the frequency of the sessions that would make more sense for you, for your schedules? But clearly the polls did not cooperate. And so we will reach out to you separately, but currently our idea is to do a session a month, not more than that, or maybe every 4 weeks, because otherwise it gets too much. This is the Unlearning Labs webpage. This is where we will put in all the information on the next sessions on community-led MEL Unlearning Labs. And with that, thank you very, very much. Thank you for your contribution. Thank you for the rich discussion. Pablo and Francis, thank you so much again. MEL is one of the most difficult topics to do in a participatory manner because there is just such a huge assumption around the jargon, around the technicality, around how specialized it is. So thank you really for holding the space for us. Nelly?
Nothing else to add. Just thank you again to Pablo and Francis and to all of you for your active participation.
And now in true MCLD fashion, if you can, we would love to, if you're able to turn on your cameras, please do so that we can do a group shot. And then we'll all say bye together so that we can hear each other's voices. If you're able to, please. Okay, we'll give people a little more time to turn on the cameras, just in case you're trying. And then take a few shots.
Hi, everyone.
Oh.
No, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you too. Hi, everyone.
Hi, thank you.
Okay, if everyone is able to turn on their cameras, have you turned it on? Then we will take a couple of screen grabs.
Hi.
Hi. One more second, let me just grab
Hi,
one more
Bunje,
picture.
how are you?
I'm well, thank you very much. Let me grab one more picture. And we can get everyone in. Thank you. And now everybody can say goodbye.
On est en train de finir.
Bye.
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 Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
See you for the next session. Bye.
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 Thank you,
Bye.
Sarah, for coordinating
Bye.
this mega
Yeah.
talk.
Okay, bye-bye.